So can you give me an example of what healthy conflict looks like in a family business? Where would the conflicts occur? What would the disagreements be? How would they decide to decide? Just give me an example of what good conflict looks like.
Yeah. So, I mean, there are some classic issues that families fight about all the time. One topic that is a pretty recurring one is about, family employment, about who gets which job, who gets which promotion, who gets paid more, who gets paid less. And you could think about the extremes of that. One is you just never talk about it, and people just sort of suffer in silence and be saying, like I know that I'm doing just as much as my brother, sister, cousin, but I'm being paid half as much, and I just stew on that until at some point I just get frustrated and leave, or I just feel dissatisfied my whole life. That doesn't sound so great either. The other extreme is that it's the source of constant arguments, about like, well, you're being paid more than me. And so what is that? I'm bringing it up not just in business, but at family, gatherings and things like that. So the other extreme is just such a constant barrage of comments about, what's unfair in the way that job promotions and who has which responsibilities and who makes how much money, that they're constantly there and uncomfortable. The better way to do that is whenever you have a really difficult issue, that you're wrestling with as a family, one way you deal with it is to get out ahead of it. And that's to develop a policy and say, let's develop some rules that we think are fair to everyone, regardless of which position we're going to find ourselves in, over, the years or decades, and spell out how it works. Right. And so, for example, we might have a process for deciding who gets which job. And maybe we bring in some outside folks that aren't my father or aunt who are going to make some of those decisions. Or we're going to set some, rules about how, compensation is going to be tied to the market value of a job. And we're going to hire an external firm to actually give us some data so that it doesn't feel so arbitrary. So there's a lot of work that families can do on these issues that are recurring, and those will vary by family, to try to get out ahead of them and think about what's a process, what's a policy, what's an approach for dealing with that that's more consistent and that feels less specific or arbitrary or sort of negatively focused on me as an individual.
So what if I'm with one of those families where we've already made a few mistakes? We've already, my Uncle Charlie's been working there for years and no one thinks he deserves to be there. And he let his son come in a job that he shows up 2 days a week. What if we're kind of a little bit down that path, but I want to course correct and get to a policy or suggest that the family gets to a policy? How can we pull back from that? Or are we sort of stuck with, we've already made exceptions?
Look, it's the best time to do these things is obviously before the issues. You have the most ability to resolve them. That's why we, oftentimes talk about the best time to develop a family employment policy is when the next generation are still in diapers, right? Like we have no idea who's going to grow up and be like the next CEO or whatever. Like we have no sense of that. And so we can easily sort of say what will be fair to anyone, regardless of which position they end up in. So that's the single best time to go after these kinds of things. Now, life isn't like that. Most of us, deal with things when they're in crisis mode, as opposed to getting way out ahead of issues. And so the answer is yes. I think you can get out ahead and deal with it. You can deal with it as it's happening. I think the thing you want to start with, rather than just jumping into the debate about the policy, is to take a step back and sort of say, what's the reason, what do we have all in common? Why do we want to work on this together? And one of the things I find incredibly helpful in a conflictual situation, it's very easy to get in oppositional mode. I'm on this side, you're on this side. And it becomes very difficult to have reasoned discussion that gets us to approaches that are going to frankly work for everybody. And so the thing that I find helpful is first, let's get everyone on the same side of the table. And you do that by sort of saying, let's just take everyone off the hook. We're not going to blame people for what happened before. Those were different circumstances. We're trying to create new ones. And let's try to get to some agreement about what will happen if what's the benefit if we actually get to a policy that works, or what's the downside if we don't. And let's get everyone on the same page to say, we need to solve this ourselves. And then once we're on the same side of the table, sometimes figuratively, sometimes literally, as opposed to opposing sides of the table, then we can start to think about what are options that are going to work for everyone. And we want to play it forward and say, not just how does this apply to Uncle Charlie and his children, but how does this apply to the generations coming way down the road? And sometimes you can, again, think more about that group and what works for them and bring some of that insight back into the present. It helps to create a little distance from the immediate issues of today.